If you ask me, Barely Scary is one of those prime examples of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends being at its prime of good episodes when it comes to its first season. Even though that this isn't technically a Valentine's Day episode, and people say that Frankie My Deal is the real Valentine's Day episode, but in all honesty, with multiple episodes being about love and stuff, we always have to pick an alternative towards the real Valentine's Day episode to go with the non-Valentine's Day episode. For the majority of this episode, every character, well, minus Blue and Mac, are so into love because they're watching their favorite show that involves around love. Yes, I know it has a title, but at the same time, that's not really the point of the main plot of this episode. Since that Blue isn't really into love and more focusing on paddleball and stuff like that, he encounters Barry, who just moved into Foster's. And we get the love at first sight cliche, but considering that these are imaginary friends we're talking about, I honestly don't expect them to do much more after watching multiple episodes. And during the first few minutes of this episode, Barry keeps hitting on Blue constantly, and Blue isn't interested into Barry because there's a gag where he doesn't remember Barry's name, and the fact that he's not into love whatsoever. You know, since that this is the first season still, and the fact that Blue isn't Flanderized, I honestly think that his behavior in this episode is mostly justified for him doing whatever he wants, as long as Mac keeps coming over. Speaking of Mac, when Barry finds out that Mac is Blue's best friend, we get to see the other side of her where she instantly snaps with a boiling point. You know, for this show having the habit of having the characters, mainly Mac, Blue, and Frankie, having breaking points and having rage moments, I honestly found this a lot more tolerable considering that this is a character that we just noticed, especially that character has a massive crush towards Blue. But when this episode continues, we get to see how obsessed Barry is to Blue, to the point that Blue is literally the only thing she cares about in her entire life, and instantly goes against Mac on the fact that he is hanging out with Blue. If I ever watch another episode that has this similar type of character, I can instantly go against her, but also understanding her motivations. Because when it comes to the show and the supporting characters, I can at least understand how they're feeling and how they're motivated to get what they want. Not to mention that they're also a tool for what Mac and Blue can do together as friendship. And this is something that has been absent in the later seasons. Now, yes, there are some episodes that did have Blue and Mac hanging out with each other, but at the same time, when you look at these episodes and see that these characters aren't really Flanderized, it really shows that this show is mostly forgotten when it comes to its good quality, and in the later seasons, it just hasn't been the same. I get that people are focusing the good episodes instead of looking at the bad episodes, or it's just opinion debates, but I really think that episodes like this, especially House of Blues, shows the true nature of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. If you really think about it, I honestly think that the details that they did in this episode really shows that this is one of the better episodes than the episodes I've seen from Foster's. For one reason only, is the fact that they make the execution on these characters very well. Seriously, for an episode that premiered in 2004, which was in the middle of the 2000s decade, it's actually kind of a good accomplishment. They introduce a new imaginary friend, give her a personality while also being a tool for Blue and Mac's relationship. And to be quite honest, if Mac wasn't in this episode, which I don't understand why he wouldn't be in this episode if that was the case, this episode will probably be way too predictable and cliches for all the wrong reasons. And I actually think that this episode does it very well. For the majority of this episode, Blue and Mac are about to do a record-breaking thing or a contest or something that they do by making a huge rubber band ball for everyone to see. And When Bailey finds out about this, she made the rubber band ball herself while preventing Mac from doing it with Blue. She manipulates Blue to thinking that Mac is ruining his record-breaking attempts, and to be quite honest, I honestly think that this manipulation is way too obvious for anyone to not be fooled with. But since this is Blue we're talking about, and the fact that Blue can't remember Bailey's name, I honestly have nothing against this. Since that Blue isn't truly hateable, you can easily sympathize on Mac's situation with his relationship with Blue. You can't totally go against Blue on this because he didn't do anything rude to Mac in this episode. Since we are aware that Blue isn't into romance because he's one of the characters who didn't watch that love show that people have been watching throughout this entire episode, it's really obvious that his motivations in this episode is just to hang out with Mac until he arrives to Foster's. And if there's one thing I had to learn the truth when it comes to Blue's development in the seasons onward, is the fact that there was really not a lot for him to do in the first season other than just staying in Foster's until Mac shows up. Granted, he goes through situations like breaking something and he gets caught out by Mr. Hellman, but other than those episodes, I think you can understand onto why Blue is flanderized in the later seasons, but it just doesn't excuse of how hateable he becomes. But what he does in this episode, I don't fully go against him because at this point, he was easily manipulated by someone that he doesn't even remember the person's name. And I gotta have to say, the jokes involving Blue not remembering Bailey's name and just saying different names like Hera or something like that, that's pretty much the best moments in this episode, considering the fact that Blue doesn't even care about Bailey whatsoever and only cares about Mac. Which, at this point, it's humorous but also really respectful towards the someone who imagining you. And I have to say that the ending of this episode where we get to see the true side of Bailey in front of everyone in Foster's, it was good karma to actually see her just desserts. And unlike Bendy, Bailey is a character that you love to hate. Because of her nature of just doing one thing while completely going against every other person over insignificant things, is something that I think that characters like her can actually be hateable for all the right reasons. Seriously, when it comes to characters that I've dealt with in the past and how hateable they are, you really hate them for the sake of hating them. But for Bailey, you hate them for the sake of loving their character. I know that this is a debatable opinion that people may be biased with, but for me, it's really well for me to actually say that to a character in one of these cartoons. Believe me, there are so many characters that I hate for all the most hateable reasons. But when it comes to Bailey, she's a character that I actually hate, but love hating. Which really makes her character really relatable, but also understandable in this episode alone. I wouldn't consider this one of my favorite episodes from the show, but for what it is, I would still place it in my top 10 episodes from this show when it comes to 6 to 10. So, all in all, I honestly think that people who put their attention on Bailey a little too much should also put their attention on the character development of Blue and Mac. Because I've always saw a video about how a character like Bailey is considered really likable for who she is. Which, in my opinion, I honestly think that the episode should get more credit when it comes to other qualities. So overall, I give this episode a 7.5 out of 10.
Let's get this started again. Me and my whole crew, we live with no rules. Let's get this started again. So if you feel like me too, there's only one thing to do. Let's go. Pay down, call the taxi cab. Got a case in the fridge and a bottle at the crib. Let's all get twisted, double fisting, drink up the resisting. Let's get this started again. Let's get this started again. Let's get this